Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Aaron Kaufman, Senior Community Manager here at Santa Monica Studio, and I'm joined by the amazing creatives of Santa Monica Studio and our illustrious comic book team. Guys, why don't you do a quick roundtable, whoever wants to shout out first.
Chris Robertson. I type things. I write down words.
Name's Tony Parker, and I just do the best I can to make what he does worth elevate to what it is. So he's got the easy job, or I've got the easy job.
Sure.
I've got the easy job. No, it's
famous last words.
I'm so happy I'm not a writer. Let me just say that, where I get to show up with these wonderful scripts, and it's like, oh, here, I've got all the hard processes that are taken care of.
That's
so
fantastic.
I
feel like I have the easier job than all of you because I just get to sit back and look at what you're doing and then say thumbs up. So that's even better. Sorry for the hard work that you guys had to deal with. I'm Corey Barlog, director over here at Santa Monica Studio.
And I'm Della Longfish. I lead the character concept side of the art team here. A lot of what I did was looking at the great visuals that were coming in from Tony and just kind of making sure we had a continuity between the game and the comic. And also another easy job I felt. It was great work coming in.
Cool.
Thank you. And you gave, again, I've mentioned before, but you gave great notes. So it's little side things. Some people really like putting their fingerprints on stuff. You did a great job. Like, you know what? I see where you're going with this. Try this, and every time I was like, you know what, you're absolutely right, I'm a dumbass. So thank you.
Well, it was really great seeing all the work you came in, because I think back in high school my dream was to be a comic book artist, so I always had that love and grew up on them, and I'm kind of like a junkie for process, so I love even seeing like the loose pages that you had coming in and just seeing the steps all the way to the final inked versions. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of a nerd dream, I think, of all of us over here to be able to witness this, because we did grow up on, how to draw comics the Marvel way, and that feeling of seeing these penciled pages, or when I would see, panel write-ups from Alan Moore or some, Neil Gaiman panels, and I would just be so fascinated that it's like, wow, this full page write-up is one panel on a page that has 8 panels. It's just wow.
Well, yes, if you're Alan Moore.
The caveat.
No pressure, Chris.
Yeah, he's the anomaly there. I've read his scripts. They're amazing, but you're very specific from the artist. Like, I am drawing this one thing. That's all I can draw right there. There is he's one person that I can think of that can get away with that, where he's to that detail.
Yeah. I remember reading a Kevin Smith script a while back and seeing the sort of heavy dialogue and very little description. Or I think there was a Mark Miller script that and he was saying, doing that pose that only he can do, describing a character, and I was like, that's how he's describing it. But he had worked with the artist so much that you kind of developed this shorthand that he's sort of writing the script directly for the specific artist that he's working with. Do you guys have that kind of thing where it feels like you can just write a quick sentence, Chris, and say like, just like this, and it's sort of a second language?
I think it definitely helps to know who's going to be drawing the thing. And then having established some sort of working relationship makes it even easier. There are certain circumstances under which I've had to write scripts not knowing who's going to draw it. And I do have to tend to put in a fair more like description and detail and direction in those scripts. Whereas here, I was really just describing what I thought Tony was going to do with it. I'm imagining in my head, knowing what his work, knowing his work, knowing how he approaches the story visually. I'm telling him what I think he's going to do, and then just kind of step out of the way and let him do that.
So it's a little bit of like the comic book equivalent of being John Malkovich.
Kind of, yeah.
Which did a great job, because everything I got was incredibly easy to work with. Like, it flew right by. We're saying, I can do this, and this would be great with this wide, expansive shot. And so thank you so much for that, because, as I said, you made my life so easy with it.
Well, I did my best. And then I can also type fewer words, which helps me.
Yes.
Did you guys talk during the process? Because now that I think about it, I don't remember at any point in time when you guys, either of you, mentioned like, oh yeah, I talked to Tony yesterday, or Chris is rewriting it like this because I can't get the art panel like that. I mean, did you guys have like a symbiotic relationship together, or How did that go?
I think there was a little bit, but most of it was mediated by the editors at Dark Horse. They tend to be like the traffic conductors over there, so they would tend to pass stuff back and forth, or at least keep us in the loop on those conversations.
And even with that, everything was so well laid out and put down for me by the time I got it. I really had very few places where I had any questions to ask. So it was, again, kudos to everyone that saw the script before me, because when I got to it, it just flowed rather. There were no points like, hey, what's going on here? I'm confused about what's happening. What's their motive? Everything as I got it was, this all makes perfect sense. And now it's my turn not to mess it up.
I often feel like that. It's my turn to not mess it up.
How do we, Corey, where we take, you and the writers write the script for the game. Chris writes the script for a comic. Like, let's talk about the difference between taking, game script to game/cinematic versus taking comic script to art panel. What do you think are some of the similarities and differences there?
It's interesting because for me, the thing I love about working at Santa Monica is the fact that there's a huge support of this sort of creative-driven process. This sense that when we entered into, say, hey, we're going to do a comic book, one of the things that I kept talking to people about was that I was like, look, I want us to be able to connect with the writer and the artist, talk about, sort of tonally, direction-wise, like where we're all at, what it feels like to be inside of this world, but then kind of free them up to tell the story that is engaging to them, right? To make sure that we sort of stay in the lane and we don't end up, in a dicey area where we sort of overwrite each other, like we do something that counteracts. But beyond that, this idea of saying, oh, well, write this exactly was never, I think, the vision. One, because they are two different mediums that I think can tell fantastically different stories, right? That left to the devices of the experts on each side, they're going to be able to do the best that they can do, right? And I think on the game story side, it's this weird constant negotiation of, you sort of have a high level directional idea and then you spend 5 years arguing with 280 people over what has to leave and what gets to stay, and then trying to make sure it all stitches together. So it is absolutely this weird 200 people on the crew of a ship that's crashing and everyone's debating how they're going to patch the hole in the wall of the ship kind of thing. Whereas I think on the comic book side, it really is that sense of two people really just need to work together and figure out the best way to tell the story, and they're so perfectly paired in this idea of the core generation, the structure, the skeleton, and then how does it manifest visually, and that each side, at least my sort of view of it from the outside looking in, is that kind of simpatico relationship, that each side has a say in both of them. It's not like, oh, the writer's the only one talking about this one thing. It's no, they're kind of both talking about this. They're giving the structure and they're adding the elements. That's the best part of, I think, team creation, is that you may come up with something, but then 10 people are going to add to it to make it so much better than you would have thought in the beginning. And I don't know, is that kind of the experience you guys have with this?
Oh, definitely. I think the joys of working in comics, unless you're a writer artist doing everything yourself, you're collaborating with somebody. And if you're not taking advantage of the other person's skills and knowledge and their own point of view to improve the story you're telling, you're basically wasting effort. Because I've written prose, and when I write prose, I'm responsible for every word on the page. But in comics, I'm part of a team, and we're all together better than each of us individually could be. So yeah, absolutely. I would never dream of dictating to an artist what they need to do. Instead, I'm, suggesting what I think might work, but then letting them make those kinds of decisions because they're better at that than I am. I can't draw.
Yeah, and for me on my side, all I'll do is look at it and try to expand on what's been already given there. Because I might have an idea of like, well, this could happen or it could be for this, but then I have to realize there might be a lot there that I don't know happens in future issues. And so I've got to be very cautious with that, as well as trying to make sure that if I'm finding something, where can I add subtle nuance, where can I add extra little like hints or foreshadowing, or I love throwing in red herrings, where things try to push something one direction, so that way when something else happens, it takes the jolt gives that much, I believe, gives the reader that much more joy out of it. But even with that, I have to be very cautious and very careful that I don't do it too blatant or too noticeable, just enough to give a bit of like, oh, I was not expecting that. But in the end, for me, it still comes down to respecting the story that the writer has given, or the writer and the writing team at editorial have given to me. It's that story coming first thing.
And that's what I like when I looked at your work, Tony, too, is just seeing that visual storytelling. One thing, this is a minor thing, but just looking at frame to frame, I almost imagine those as camera cuts, which is something we always had to show everything a continuous shot. So seeing how you handled the images in each frame, but then also through the page, having the visual hold up as well, too, like getting that flow was one of those things I struggled when I was, playing with comics way back in the day.
Well, it's we treat a lot of it just like we're supposed to treat a lot like maybe it's like cinematography, where I've got like the 5 C's of cinematography there up on my bookshelf right now, and where it's like the big things about not violating the 180-degree rule, making sure you maintain a left-right flow. Yes, John Ford can have the Indians and the Cowboys charging the same direction, even though they're charging each other. You really can't do that. So it's always making sure that we still will work with in a very cinematic way, but also respecting what we call the meta panel composition, where it's not just how each panel within itself holds up, but how the panels rely on each other one throughout the page to create the pacing of the story.
And that is something that we usually start thinking about on the level of script. For example, the left side of a panel is happening before the right side of the panel, really, if you think about it. Because, so that like characters tend to be arranged in my scripts from left to right based on who's talking when, so that you never have a situation where, the dialogue balloons are having to trail across the page because the character on the left talks and the character on the right answers.
Thank you so much for that, because there's some writers out there that do that, and then I've got to go through rearrange it so I can have the switch people's places between left and right on the panel without breaking the 180. And then even for me, I'll look at it. Do I want the words before, after whoever's saying them? Does it come in with he says no? So if I put it before the person, it's more of an emphatic. If I put it after the person, it can be more of a delay. So therefore, there's also about how the word balloons work within it as well.
So in the write-ups of each of the panels, you're actually detailing out, almost in the order in which you want the reader to read them, who's in there, what they're doing, and then the placement of the word bubbles?
If more than one character is talking in a panel, almost invariably I'll mention that. I'll say this character's on the left, this person's in the middle, this person's on the right. If the action is simple enough that it's just a single action or a single character talking, then I'll leave it up to the artist to figure out how best to arrange it. Because again, the artist is largely responsible for how the reader's eye is going to track across the page, and how they do that layout is going to help, facilitate the reader moving through it in the most seamless way. So that's where I don't want to give extraneous description, because it's not helpful. It's only when it's necessary for me to communicate to the artist, hey, before you start laying this out, just be aware that these are happening in sequence within the span of this one panel. That's when I would do so.
Oh, so what, for both of you then, what was kind of like the most sort of difficult single panel that you had to kind of conceptualize and write, one that you kind of felt like you maybe had to go back to multiple times or really kind of step back and think about? And then, what was the hardest one, I think, to draw? And were they the same? Were they different?
For me, I think it was the hardest panel for me to do, but I think one of my favorite panels of the whole series, where Kratos puts his hand on, like, actually has physical contact with Atreus, where he's actually, hey, you're my son, I love you. I'm basically paraphrasing, I got to do this to make sure you're safe. You're not ready for this. I think it was in issue 3. That's down the road. But for that one, that was probably my, because there are a lot of trying to retell the same image over, where it like ends with bears charging, then the next issue starts with bears charging, making sure that's different. That can be a little bit of a challenge, but that's cool. For me, trying to find those emotional content pieces, for me, that was making sure I can nail that, because if we don't care about the characters, we don't care about them being in danger, we don't care about the action. So we got to make sure that, or at least I've got to make sure on my side that I've actually executed the emotion that's been written into it. So for me, that was off the top of my head, and it could change later on, but for right now, that was probably the most difficult and yet most rewarding of the series.
It's hard for me to pinpoint a single panel. For me, it was largely finding the right balance between silence and the character's internal monologue, like finding just enough of those first-person captions to convey what he's thinking, and then just shut up and let the art take care of the rest of it.
Yeah, that's a hard one for Kratos. We struggled for years trying to figure out the amount of speaking, which is either way too much and he became this very loquacious orator, or so little that you're just like, I have no idea what's happening with him. I mean, do you hit a flow? So like when you sit down, I recently had to do something, a very, very junior baby version of what you do, where I'm just having to describe a single image, right, for a concept piece, and I have to break it down through all the sort of foreground, midground layers and all the descriptions of the characters and everything. And it made me realize I would be a terrible comic book writer because it was like one image and I took like 3 weeks to do it. I'm just agonizing over every detail. And I'm like, you guys are doing, 25 to 28 page books, right? That have tons of this stuff. How do you hit a flow for that?
I mean, a lot of it's just practice. And certainly I find that as a project, the first issues are always the hardest. And the longer a project, you kind of learn how to do that book the more you do that book. And looking back, I noticed that even before the scripts got to Tony, I went through multiple revisions of the early scripts with Dark Horse Editorial. But then by the time we were in the last couple of issues, I think we do like one revision pass. Like I would do a draft and then we'd do one round of tweaks and then that would be it. So certainly the first issue, I think probably the 0 issue, the digital one, went through even more. I think that there were like 8 revisions in that thing. But by the time we got to here, I think it took like 3 rounds before we had it all nailed down.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. From the art side, it's usually about 3 issues where until you get a really good feel for the book. It can be one character, it can have a dozen characters, but it's getting a feel for that visual iconography, getting a feel for how the characters behave within and how that universe behaves. And so for me, it's about 3 issues. Like, okay, now I'm fully into it.
So what I'm hearing is we need to do a 30-issue run. That sounds awesome.
Yes.
That will really hit our stride.
Tony, when you got into that flow by issue 3, if you were reflecting on kind of like the feedback that we gave you, I mean, it's where Della can chime in. Like, what was the hardest feedback to just get right?
Even on my side, that's something I'm curious about, Tony, too. Here at the studio, we've been living with these characters in this world for like 5 years, and then we just, you get the kickoff, and hey, in a few months, let's see what you got. So, yeah, how was that warming up into the visual look?
Everything was great, and I've mentioned this before, except for Atreus' face, and it's something where with him, and I feel a bit better because when I see other people do fan art, and there's some amazing fan art out there, no one can get his face just right. Everyone's got everything's, I mean, the stylized, but there's something. The gentleman it was based on has got a very unique facial structure, and trying to get it just right with that balance of forehead to cheekbone to eyes to nose. He's the one that I had the hardest problem with. And for me, I love using reference. So you guys said amazing amounts of reference, and it was wonderful. I love that. And then after that, as soon as the first Kratos 6-inch or 7-inch action figure came out, that was a pre-order for me. And the one thing that kills me is the 2-pack didn't come out till after I was finished with the series.
Of course,
so
always happens.
Well, thankfully you also thank you for gifting us with the statue. So that was by my desk the entire time. Right, so I try to look at his face there, and I deal with lighting, try to do it. But for him, everything else was for me. I thought snapped together. Once I figured out how his beard fit into his face, Kratos became much easier. But Atreus' like the expression in his face, that was my Achilles heel.
Well, that was something even in studio. The main characters take a ton of time and iteration to kind of get right. And one thing once we got Sonny was this great kind of a combination of he looks very capable, but there's still an innocence about him, which is kind of like visually it can be like threading a needle almost. Like I said, the feedback we had mostly was really minor, and some of it was just some stuff on the faces and everything, and it just maybe some of those Norse elements in the environment. But overall, you were getting it looking really good.
Thank you. I appreciate. I was trying my best with it just to get it down right there. I mean, his costume was great, and again, I had so much wonderful reference and so much thematic stuff around it, it was such a joy to draw. It was just, for me, that was that one thing, like, nope, not quite right, not quite right, not quite right. And by the end of the issue, it's like, and now I've got it, and I'm on to, oh, it's done.
Right. It's all over. Yeah, it's interesting because when we were designing the original sort of idea of Atreus, we were struggling. We didn't have any reference. We didn't have Sonny at the time.
Yeah.
And all the drawings, like, first we did a bunch of drawings and I was like, oh, these are really cool, but they feel like a cartoon version of a kid. It was hard to kind of connect and feel like, hey, this is a real kid. And then we started this experiment way back in the first year, I think, where I was like, hey, imagine what 11-year-old Kratos would have looked like. Let's start drawing an 11-year-old Kratos and then incorporating some sort of traditionally Nordic features in there to kind of add in what the mother would look like, because we didn't really have a visual look of the mother as well. Yeah. And it was an interesting exercise, but it also really just never felt right. Like, we kept looking at it going, something's wrong, something's missing, we just don't know what it is, and we were struggling. And then when we found Sonny, and I had said, look, I don't just want to cast this kid, I want to use his face for Atreus. I think he's perfect. And when his headshot kind of circulated around to the visual development department, everybody was like, oh, this is it. This is right. This kid is perfect.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't replace this concept of using that real person as that base.
And literally, I think we could have made an art of book just out of the explorations we did for Atreus. Like, there was
it was pretty crazy. And he didn't have a name at the time.
Son. But even that part, I remember real early on, we kind of did Atreus back at that age. But then I think there was also a thought early on that Kratos' son needs to be strong, mean, have a lot of that. But I think the intent from you the whole time was that he's not. He's the opposite. There's an innocence. It's like what's good from Kratos is in the son.
Yeah.
How do you guys as artists know, like, when it's right? Like, we went through so many iterations on Atreus, and then all of a sudden, boom, we get a real life actor, and like, that's it. Is it just
is it like
just a
gut feeling?
Like, what is
or
it?
Is it like, no, I see the ratios and that's all perfect, or is it just like this little twinge in your spider sense?
Deadlines.
Ship dates and deadlines.
Finished, not perfect. It's, you do the best you can with it. I mean, there are times where, like, yes, I nailed it, and other times I'm sure you have the same thing where, like, you know what, this is as good as I'm gonna get with this without having to sacrifice the rest of the whole book. So there are times it'll snap there, and you get that feel like, you know what, I've got it. This is about what it feels like. And sometimes you look at it with fresh eyes the next day, and you're like, I must have been high. I'm horribly wrong with that. But it's so much of it is just sometimes it snaps. It's something you go through, like, that's perfect. I say it's right there. But so much of it is like I really love working with, like, grayscale ink wash, and that'd be fun to go through and, like, do this whole book in, like, fully painted stuff. But the other side of it is that would be stupid for deadlines and for corrections. So after a while, you're like, you know what, let's work with the style and with the art and with what final image is going to work best thematically throughout the whole book. And so much of that is just how it snaps in.
So Tony, how was it the difference between using our established characters, which more had to kind of be on model, but then the nice thing is in the story and the visuals is you guys opened up some new characters as well with the Bear Clan and the Seer and stuff. How were playing around with those characters, because you had a little more liberty on them?
That was incredible fun. I got to, like, the leader of it, where he's got the scar tissue, but it's not your standard, oh, look, he's got this sexy scar. So he has part of his nose mutilated, where there's an actual disfiguration there. And so for that was a lot of fun. And I will say thank you, because y'all also sent me a lot of reference, like, here's some of the other people that inhabit that world. Now, you can't use these, but use these as inspiration, like, oh my God, I'm pulling this, I'm taking this, I'm picking that. And because that way it helps me to establish stronger within what the established library you already have is.
Yeah, that was something for us that was great, seeing your designs come back, because we could tell that you were kind of in sync with the visual approach that we were going with, because we didn't want, in our cast of characters, like the Hollywood-looking characters. We wanted to kind of celebrate the imperfections of the characters, and I think that's what we kind of saw in the work that you were doing as well.
I think that's exactly what I was going for, because all your characters these are very rough, lived-in people. Yeah. These are not go out there and they sing show tunes all day and are happy, and they got wonderful dance numbers, and which, dude, that would be awesome.
That was the original version, but for some reason somebody decided not to fund it.
If they do an extra version, I would love that. I'll add my voice to that. But it's something where I really want, where the beards aren't these finely kept beards are smooth. These things are rough. and they've got stuff in them, and they've got muck in them, and that was just so much fun to play with it. And even with that, like you have the transformation of the bears.
Hmm.
It's like, do their hats turn into part of the bear? Does it absorb? How does it absorb everything? And thank you all for allowing me to have the leeway to play with that as well.
How did you handle the writing on that one? Were you trying to get a step-by-step description, or was that more of the, I'm going to toss this over to you, Tony?
I pretty much left that one in Tony's court because I
Smart.
think I just said bear monster. And then, you know, in their human form, Tony, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I put maybe a couple of sentences in at the outset about roughly how I saw them looking, but then everything beyond that, it was Bear Man number 1, Bear Man number 2. But I just wanted to point out real quick that like this is all dialogue, and I think it was the letterer at Comicraft who found this rune font so that we could hide what they were saying behind these runes. But I don't know if many readers have decoded everything that they're saying there. In some cases, it's fairly obvious. Letter substitution.
Yeah, I love that. I'm always a big fan of really playing around with sort of the masking of creating the mystery of these characters. Like the fraction run of Hawkeye when they have the whole issue with the dog.
Oh, yeah.
And the dog is just like word bubbles of sort of symbology and like, you know, maps almost. Is really clever. I love that kind of stuff.
Well, one thing I want to quickly interject is I want to have a big vocal thank you to Dan Jackson and to John Rochelle, colorist and the letter respectively, because they did such an amazing job with this as well. So I think those are both people that, as we look at it for how well it turned out, that I really want to make sure that they get a big shout as well. Just kind of popping that in there.
Nice. Is there time, you were talking earlier about this idea of interjecting red herrings or you know, some sort of visual concepts within some of the earlier parts, but then potentially maybe not even knowing how issue 4 or 3 are going to go while you're working on the first one. How is that sort of working where, I mean, I know on our side we're the same, where we may lay out a general structure, but things change so often that, you know, there were times we were shooting scenes on the stage that we had no idea what the location was going to look like. You know, we were just like, okay, we know we have to have a table right here. I really hope it ends up looking cool and what they're looking at fits the dialogue that we're talking about right here.
Well, part of it is what editorial let me get away with, but a lot of it is I try to make sure they're small enough that it could be a throwaway thing or something can be like no prized or forgotten about later, where it's nothing big like, and there's a giant shadow in the background that's not in the script. It's much more like different runes or different rune locations or different types of scars or tattoos, or again with the 3 bear people, they all have the bear hats and like bear hats, so the skull hats. And you can see those hats kind of absorb into the skull when they transform first on. And so I could say, well, that's part of the magic. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And then later find out, nope, they just transform. So I can be like, nope, it's just like old D&D where you polymorph, everything absorbs in and just becomes part of the bear.
I always meant it to be that way. Nice.
Was it also
Yes.
easy along those lines with you guys kind of had the same hurdle we had, was representing the mother but not representing the mother?
I did have, there's one picture of her in this issue 0. So that's, I think, the only appearance she's ever made outside of Ash form. But
yeah, just like it was just like the body, right? Like just kind of in the shadow.
yeah, it's like over the
window.
over the
Issue
shadow
0,
with the
first
hand.
appearance
Yeah.
of Faye.
Yeah.
And
So
it's all canon
as
now.
I recall, that went back and forth a bit. There were several iterations, not on the art side, but on the script side before we ever got there.
Yeah.
Like, were we going to have that shot or not?
Yeah, I kept on trying to find reference for her. That failed miserably. So
Yeah. We got nothing on that
Yeah.
one.
No,
That'll take Corey 3 weeks.
Yeah,
Or
well,
3
that-
years.
Notoriously indecisive and really good at just kicking that can down the road for making the decisions on certain things. Chris, did you
with
ever have
how,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, with how amazing the game turned out. Again, congratulations as well on all the accolades and all the things you've won with it. But with how well it turned out, I'd rather leave those things open so you're not hamstrung to them down the road. So again, and congratulations. So I want to put that in there too.
Very
Yeah,
much.
appreciate it.
That's so nice. Chris, did you ever have situations? I know in the creation of the game, we had situations where I needed to figure something out that was late in the game because we were doing things out of order. So I wasn't really ready to figure this out, but I had to just figure something out so we could get people started on working on that. Did you ever have to kind of jump ahead, figure something out so that it could be seeded in an earlier issue, or even just kind of in a, hey, we got to get ahead of this one part because it's going to take longer?
I was pretty lucky in that, Dark Horse tends to work pretty far in advance. And we were working from an outline. So I was, there were several instances where I had to change the direction of things in a couple of spots in the first one or two issues based on where things were going to end up by issue like 4. But it was early enough that like work hadn't really started on that. Like, I mean, I was still, noodling with it on my side and it hadn't yet gotten to Tony. I mean, there were some course corrections along the way because there was a lot of, I wasn't quite clear early on how we would stage scenes with Kratos and Atreus and the Seer. There were a couple of different versions of that where they were all in the same room together. And then that stepped on the toes of things that were happening in the game that I wasn't aware of yet. Or, stuff that Atreus couldn't hear, things like that. But again, that was before Tony had got it. So it was early enough that we could fix it before, any energy was wasted.
Nice. Do you ever have any of the strange flashes of either clarity or inspiration? Sometimes I have those things where I wake up in the middle of the night or I'm watching something and then all of a sudden it's like I just completely figured out something that I've been struggling with for months and months and months and emphatically tell my wife who's sitting next to me going, I have no idea what you're saying and whatever. That sounds great. I'm glad you figured that out, right?
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
It's funny because this happens to me. It's not uncommon that I will have the germ of an idea, or a rough notion, but it's not fully done, and I will spend ages trying to figure it out and make it incredibly elaborate and go through all kinds of iterations and build it and tear it down and build it up again, and then finally, after lots and lots of labor, I get it into the proper shape. Like it finally just aligns and all the pieces line up and it looks almost identical to the original idea I had, but just assembled in just the right way. So, it's intuitively obvious in retrospect, but it takes me ages to get there. And then I kick myself for taking that long to get there, but I'm happy I did. And then we're there. So yeah, that happens on almost every project at one point or another.
I feel like that's like just the mirror of my process is the, original idea. Oh, that can't be it. And then you rip it apart, destroy it, kick it, drown it. And then it comes back up and you're like, oh, that was exactly where I was before. All right. Fine. And then move on.
But you've earned it that time though.
Yeah.
When
right.
you first see it, you can't recognize it. Yeah.
And that's the thing too. On the visual side, sometimes we'll do the same thing, just go cycle on cycle and then come back and the first one really stands out as something that was the strongest. But I think the benefit is we can feel like we didn't leave any stone unturned.
Yeah.
Like we really can evaluate it against everything to make sure that's the right idea.
That sense of earning it, I like that you feel like it's too easy. Like we got it right the first time. Like we've had that where we do a meeting on something and the first drawing that somebody does, I'm like, oh, I love it. That's amazing. But am I just falling in love with the first thing? Should I not like this and then pretend and then later we'll come back to it and go like, whoa, what about that first thing that we did? I'm just not that clever. I love this. Let's just stick with this. Move on.
But how did you guys feel with the Berserker? Because we didn't do 20 different concepts from Tony's concept on that. It was almost like you hit it on the nose on the first one, Tony.
It's like
thank you.
Christmas for me. Like it's one of those things where it was like you see it and you're like, cool, the present is awesome. I don't want to return this. It's good, right? But then you have that collective everybody going like, should we? I don't know. Should we give notes? I kind of have that weird insecurity where, like, when people nail it, I feel that still need to go like, oh, I guess I got to give notes. Otherwise, it's like, what the hell do I do, right? Like I'm clearly not doing a job if I just go, you did great, right? But it truly turns out like that sometimes where it's just it's right, and you want to go like, all right, well, I'll let other people give the finicky nitpick notes. I'll just give the thumbs up and go, nice.
And I think the nice thing with a character like the Berserker, or even some of the ones in the game, is it has enough historical and mythological background to give you a little bit of a direction, but doesn't lock you in, so you still get to take a little creative license, which I think is a nice balance. Because some of the stuff in Norse mythology is so abstract once you get past what's known in kind of the public domain that it's really question marks or really abstract. So I think you did great with the design on this, kind of based on those things.
Yeah.
Thank you. And again, you guys sent back some great, I mean, the notes you sent back, they were great because they're very specific. There were no fingerprint notes on them. Everything was like, here, try this. And like the first couple of designs for the bear, I went a little overboard where it wasn't, it's not a bear, that's a monster. We need a bear. I'm like, okay, try this. You're like, oh my God, that's genius. And then the other stuff where like you sent like back up 1 or 2 Berserker notes. I'm like, I'm stealing all of this. It's not stealing because I'm working for you, but it's still like, this is great. I love having this. And so I took those and incorporated, but every time you got notes, I got notes from y'all. There were always great notes.
Well,
there was never a thing of why do I need this? This was, you know what, you're absolutely right. I'm a dumbass for not seeing it first, because it's so, when you said it, it was so blatant. It was wonderful.
Well, like we said, like the work that was coming back from you, most of the time we didn't want to give a lot of artistic direction. I think as long as you were kind of hitting the tone and the overall feel, that was the main thing that we were kind of concerned about, and that it felt like the worlds had continuity.